Beneath the neat rows of dates and victories lies another war, fought in locked rooms, whispered across static-filled radios, buried under false reports and sealed crates. In the shadows of history's official record, fragments of truth still breathe, restless and unclaimed. These are not the battles carved on monuments, but the ones erased before they could be spoken, where silence was the final weapon, and even the victors feared what they had taken. The earliest mention of Operation Harbormaster exists not in a formal archive but in the margins of a torn MI6 intercept sheet, dated May 2, 1945. The handwriting, faded pencil over damp paper, records unmarked convoy, leaving Berlin sector under cover of artillery fire, destination unknown. At the time, Allied forces were pressing into the German capital from east and west, and few movements went unnoticed. Yet this particular column, reportedly consisting of 3 Opel Blitz trucks and a pair of captured Soviet GAZ escorts, was not listed in any Wehrmacht withdrawal plans or Red Army seizure reports. Each truck carried wooden crates sealed with dark wax and stamped RSHA, the abbreviation for Reich Sicherheitsamt, the Reich Main Security Office. Such markings were not unusual in wartime Berlin, but the convoy's route was southwest through the bombed districts of Spandau, skirting Allied checkpoints, and into the fog-covered backroads of Lower Saxony. Post-war accounts suggest the convoy was intercepted, not destroyed, by British elements of the 11th Armored Division near the Weser River. The official war diary of the division, preserved in the Imperial War Museum, makes no mention of the incident. Yet a single entry in the diary of Corporal Malcolm Hurst, a signals operator, describes a coded transmission received at 0430 hours, priority diversion. Cargo reassignment to Harbormaster. Proceed to RAF Koltischal. Hurst's diary was never part of the official record and surfaced only after his death in 1983, discovered among personal effects. RAF Koltischal, located in Norfolk, was at that time a high-security base, primarily tasked with night fighter operations. But aerial photographs from May 1945 show a fenced-off section on the eastern perimeter containing several temporary hangars not seen in earlier reconnaissance. Declassified site maps mark the zone only as special stores, with an access road patrolled by military police. Local civilians later recalled the arrival of trucks bearing mud-caked tires and shattered windshields, escorted by armed men in mismatched uniforms, British battle dress mixed with unmarked gray greatcoats. What happened to the RSHA crates once they reached Koltischal remains uncertain. The Ministry of Defense maintains that no such items were ever logged. A 1946 base inventory, however, lists non-standard mechanical assemblies, experimental guidance housings, alloy composites, origin, unspecified. These entries are struck through in thick black ink, and their requisition numbers are missing. Cross-referencing with surviving RAF procurement forms reveals a sudden shipment of scrap to the de Havilland Aircraft Company in Hatfield that same summer. No scrap records survive. In the 1970s, a retired MI6 officer, under the pseudonym A.R. Chalmers, gave a brief interview to a German radio program on wartime intelligence. He claimed to have handled documents relating to a German navigational apparatus, something ahead of its time, brought from Berlin in the final days. Chalmers insisted the device was dismantled under supervision, its components dispersed to avoid duplication. He died 3 months later in a road accident deemed without suspicious circumstances. Adding weight to Chalmers's claim, a 1958 NATO technical memorandum, classified Cosmic Top Secret, includes a passing reference to Harbormaster-derived components in a section on early missile guidance systems. The document was only partially declassified in 2004, with entire paragraphs redacted under Article 13 of the UK Public Records Act, citing ongoing operational sensitivity. Experts familiar with NATO archives suggest such sensitivity is almost unheard of for material more than half a century old. The few surviving witnesses are inconsistent. One former RAF ground crewman, interviewed anonymously in 1992, recalled opening one crate. Inside was nothing I recognized, just a dull metal sphere with strange etching, like a compass but without hands. Another claimed the cargo contained not weapons but archives, files and rolls of microfilm, loaded into a separate aircraft under heavy guard. Perhaps most unsettling is the pattern of missing or altered photographs. The Imperial War Museum's extensive visual record of RAF Koltaschall includes only one aerial frame from May 1945 that shows the eastern perimeter clearly. In the digitized version, the hangars appear blurred, as though by photographic fault. The original negative, when examined under magnification, reveals precise scratches over the same area, scratches not found on adjacent frames. In 1997, an independent researcher filed a Freedom of Information request for Operation Harbormaster with the UK National Archives. The response was terse: "No records responsive to your request." Yet internal routing notes mistakenly left attached to the response show that the file code harb/45 exists but is held under retention for national security. The retention date was set to review in 2075. To this day, no official explanation has been offered for why a small convoy of Berlin cargo survived the chaos of surrender, crossed active combat zones, and ended up in one of Britain's most secure wartime airfields, only to vanish from all subsequent inventories. Theories range from advanced gyroscopic missile guidance to stolen Allied prototypes captured during earlier campaigns. The lack of surviving documentation, however, suggests one of two possibilities. Either the cargo was destroyed and erased from record, or it remains in storage somewhere, its purpose still relevant enough to keep secret 8 decades later. Norfolk locals still tell the story of the night in late May 1945 when the airfield sirens sounded without warning. "We thought it was another bombing," recalls an elderly resident. But instead, there was this rumble, like heavy engines. The whole sky seemed to hum. No bombs fell, but the next morning, military police blocked all approach roads for more than 24 hours. Somewhere between Berlin's ruins and the coastal fog of Norfolk, a piece of wartime history was quietly removed from the visible timeline. And until the files marked Harb/45 are opened, if they ever are, the true nature of Operation Harbormaster will remain locked in the same silence that carried those trucks out of a dying Reich. In April 1945, the city of Königsberg was a carcass of stone and ash, its streets gutted by artillery and its surviving population cowering in basements. On the 9th, the German garrison formally surrendered to the Red Army. Within days, sappers from the 3rd Guards Tank Army were combing the ruins for unexploded ordnance and hidden munitions dumps. What they found beneath the smoldering remains of the Schloss Königsberg command bunker was neither. The discovery began with a collapsed stairwell in the bunker's western wing. Beneath 2 meters of reinforced concrete lay a steel vault door welded shut along its seams. According to the post-action logbook of Major Alexander V. Grumov, the door was impervious to cutting torch or explosive breaching, required 2 days of continuous application to open. The logs note that the vault was under constant guard and that special department officers from SMERSH were present at all times, recording every movement. When the vault was finally opened on April 15, only 5 men were allowed inside. Grumov's log entry for that day, later classified and stored in the Soviet Ministry of Defense archives, reads simply, "Content sensitive. Order received to seal and prepare for eastbound transport." No inventory was attached to the record. Unofficial accounts, however, suggest something extraordinary. Private Sergei Kudrin, a member of the sapper unit, spoke in hushed tones decades later about strange machines, like half-built radar dishes, but smaller, and boxes with cables and copper coils. Another soldier claimed the equipment emitted a low, constant hum, as if it was alive. By May 1945, the equipment, now labeled under the codename Magnetsturm, was shipped to a secure research site outside Sverdlovsk in the Ural Mountains. The official line, repeated in Soviet press decades later, was that the Königsberg vault contained only captured German communications gear. Yet an internal NKVD memorandum, partially declassified after the Soviet collapse, contradicts that narrative. The memo warns of high-output electromagnetic discharge devices capable of disrupting airborne motors within tactical radius, and urges further study for application against imperialist aggression. The Soviet interest in electromagnetic weaponry during the late 1940s and 1950s is documented but poorly understood. Magnetsturm's trail appears briefly in a 1949 correspondence between the Ministry of Defense and the All-Union Electrotechnical Institute. The document refers to adapting captured systems for field deployment, but laments critical instability in sustained output. After that, Magnetsturm vanishes from official records for almost 3 decades. Then, in 1978, U.S. reconnaissance satellites passing over the Urals photographed an installation near Nizhny Tagil under apparent construction. One image, later leaked to Western intelligence journals, shows a device uncannily similar to wartime German engineering sketches of experimental magnetic field projectors. This resemblance triggered renewed interest in Magnetsturm within NATO's technical branches. A classified British Defense Intelligence note dated September 4, 1978 remarks, "Configuration suggests German wartime origin. Correlates with Königsberg seizure, 1945." What happened next is a matter of conjecture and circumstantial fragments. On October 19, 1978, a violent explosion obliterated the Nizhny Tagil site. Soviet media reported it as a natural gas storage accident. However, seismic readings recorded in Helsinki and Oslo indicated a shock signature inconsistent with gas detonations, more akin to high-energy equipment failure or deliberate demolition. The Soviet Union declined all international offers of assistance and sealed the area for months. When it reopened, there was no sign of the structure, and the land had been covered with a new concrete pad. Following the Soviet collapse in 1991, Western researchers gained partial access to declassified military files. Among them was a maintenance roster for the Sverdlovsk facility, dated April 1946. Listed alongside routine repairs was Vault Storage Unit No. 3, Königsberg apparatus, magnetic disruptor, output calibration required. The document bore the initials of Colonel Viktor Reshetov, a known liaison officer between Soviet research bureaus and the Red Army's engineering corps. A separate trove of papers, smuggled out of Russia in the late 1990s by an unnamed archivist, included what appears to be a schematic of the Magnetsturm device. The drawing shows a tripod-mounted dish connected to a bank of capacitors and a cylindrical housing labeled Feld generator. Handwritten annotations in German warn of dangerous field collapse and recommend pulsed discharge only. Technical experts consulted on the diagram have suggested it could, in theory, produce a concentrated electromagnetic pulse, sufficient to stall unshielded aircraft engines at close range. None of this has been officially acknowledged. The Russian Ministry of Defense maintains that no such weapon was recovered, and that all rumors are Western propaganda designed to inflate the myth of Nazi science. Still, the pattern of archival erasures is hard to ignore. Pages relating to April 1945 Königsberg operations are missing from otherwise complete Red Army unit histories. Logbooks from the 3rd Guards Tank Army end abruptly on April 14, resuming on the 16th with no mention of the vault. Former Soviet engineers, interviewed anonymously in the early 2000s, described the atmosphere surrounding Magnetsturm as paranoid. One recalled being told, "You are working on a device the Germans could not finish. We will finish it." Another claimed the 1978 disaster was not an accident but an intentional self-destruction after a field test exceeded safe containment. The final clue may lie in an obscure entry in the 1980 U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, annual report. Buried in the appendix, under Foreign Developments of Interest, is a reference to remote field impulse generators, possibly of German World War II design lineage, tested in the Soviet interior prior to facility loss. No further details are provided. Whether Magnetsturm was a functioning weapon or merely an incomplete prototype is still unknown. What is clear is that something was found in Königsberg, something the Soviet state guarded fiercely for over 3 decades, and something worth destroying rather than letting it be exposed to outside eyes. Even now, residents of Kaliningrad, the modern name for Königsberg, speak of the vault as if it were a legend. Some point to a fenced-off section of the old bunker complex, where the ground is unnaturally warm even in winter, as though something beneath still hums quietly in the dark. In January 1952, deep winter gripped the Bavarian Alps. Snow choked the valleys and muffled the roads, making the market town of Garmisch-Partenkirchen seem even more isolated than usual. It was here that U.S. Army intelligence launched an operation so sensitive that, 70 years later, its very existence remains unacknowledged in official records. The man they came for was Wilhelm Kraft, a former SS Hauptsturmführer who had served as a cryptographic engineer at the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA, during the war. Unlike most surviving Nazi code specialists, Kraft had not been taken in Operation Paperclip or prosecuted at Nuremberg. Instead, he disappeared into the post-war refugee networks that crisscrossed Austria and southern Germany. Intelligence chatter picked up in late 1951 suggested Kraft was living under an assumed name in Garmisch, quietly selling modified Enigma derivatives to unidentified foreign buyers. The intercepts originated from a British listening station in Cyprus, which had caught fragments of a conversation between two Spanish-speaking men referring to Herr Wilhelm and La Máquina de Baviera. The U.S. Army Security Agency, ASA, immediately flagged the matter for action. A temporary task force, designated Unit Larkspur, was formed under the cover of the 513th Military Intelligence Service Group. Personnel rosters for the 513th in January 1952 contained unexplained gaps, with several NCOs marked Detached Service, No Location. Surviving personnel records list them as clerks, drivers, or supply officers, yet post-war veterans groups quietly confirmed they were trained in counter-espionage. On January 14, Unit Larkspur flew into Munich aboard an unmarked C-47. Witness accounts from Garmisch described the arrival of American trucks at odd hours, headlights off, fitted with chains for snow travel. Blackout orders were enforced in certain neighborhoods, ostensibly to conserve power during a cold snap. Unofficially, they masked night operations. Local police logs from January 16 note, foreign military personnel requesting cooperation, followed by an entry simply reading, confidential instruction, no patrols east of Partnack River. That same night, residents on the outskirts reported hearing dull concussions from the forested slopes beyond Wank Mountain. The official Army history of 1952 lists no combat or special operations in Bavaria during that period. Yet, in the National Archives, a partially burned after-action report, lacking a title page, records, objective secured, secondary cache destroyed. 1 hostile Kia, 1 evaded. Contact Buenos Aires established post-exfil. The phrase post-exfil is unusual. It implies that after Unit Larkspur left, communications with the target's network continued. Kraft's fate is murky. One source, a retired Counterintelligence Corps (CIC) officer, claimed he was killed in a brief firefight when the team stormed a converted hunting lodge he used as a safe house. Another insists he was captured alive and flown out of Oberpfaffenhofen Air Base before being disappeared into a stateside interrogation program. No death certificate exists, no immigration records place him in the Americas, and no family members came forward to claim his effects. The Buenos Aires lead is the most troubling thread. In April 1952, an Army SIGINT bulletin, now declassified, contains a heavily redacted paragraph about transmissions consistent with modified Wehrmacht cipher protocols originating from South America. Handwritten in the margin is, matches Kraft key structure, probability greater than 80%. The only date attached is April 9th, nearly 3 months after Kraft's alleged death. Further evidence surfaces in a classified addendum to the 1954 NSA Foreign Cryptography Survey, which notes persistent echoes of 4-rotor variant with irregular stepping gear, believed defunct post-1945, reappearing in Argentine commercial channels. These echoes vanish after mid-1955, coinciding with the overthrow of Juan Perón. Unit Larkspur's own paper trail is skeletal. The name appears only twice in surviving U.S. Army communications, once in a requisition for Alpine cold weather gear, and once in a passenger manifest for a returning C-47 marked classified cargo. Every other operational file has either been shredded or, as one FOIA response put it, does not exist under that designation. The few men who admitted to serving in Larkspur speak cautiously. One, interviewed in 1987 under anonymity, described Kraft as a quiet man, clever eyes, hands always moving like he was turning an invisible crank. The veteran recalled that the lodge contained a workshop with 2 machines. Neither was quite an enigma. One looked adapted for Spanish, the other for Cyrillic. The machines were taken apart on site, their parts placed in oilcloth bags. A separate crate containing documents was flown out immediately, destination unknown. In the decades since, scattered hints suggest the Buenos Aires connection was never fully resolved. A 1963 CIA field cable from Montevideo mentions German cipher veterans meeting in Parana province, but offers no detail. In 1971, British GCHQ analysts spotted non-standard rotor patterns in encrypted messages linked to suspected arms traffickers in Chile. Though unrelated on paper, these patterns matched the structure identified in the Buenos Aires intercepts of 1952. By the 1990s, most direct witnesses were gone. Only a handful of artifacts survive. 2 photographs from a Garmisch street corner in winter, showing a pair of U.S. soldiers in unmarked parkas speaking to a man whose face has been scratched out, and a ledger from a local inn with a single entry in English, Larkspur Party, room block held until further notice. The truth behind Unit Larkspur's mission is trapped in the space between vanished records and fragmented testimony. Whether Kraft died in Bavaria or reappeared in South America under a new identity, the Buenos Aires intercepts suggest that his cipher technology, or someone else's based on his work, was active long after the world believed the Enigma's legacy had ended. The Garmisch Lodge was demolished in 1960. Its stone foundation still lies beneath the pine needles, and locals say that on certain cold nights you can hear a faint clicking in the wind, like keys turning inside a machine that hasn't run in decades. On April 17, 1944, elements of the British 8th Army's 13th Corps advanced through the Central Apennines during the drive toward Rome. Their objective that day was the small Italian village of Vettor, a cluster of stone houses perched above a ravine, long occupied by a detachment of Wehrmacht signals personnel. Intelligence reports identified it as a routine relay station, but field surveillance hinted at heavier electrical activity than a standard outpost would generate. When Allied infantry entered the village at 0930 hours, they found little resistance. German troops had withdrawn hastily, leaving behind equipment still warm to the touch. In the courtyard of the commandeered municipal building, signal wires snaked down into a narrow shaft covered with a rusted iron hatch. A Royal Engineers sapper unit was ordered to investigate. What they found was an underground chamber lit by bare bulbs, lined with banks of oscilloscopes, dials, and reel-to-reel recorders. At the center stood the heart of what the German engineers had been testing, a compact lattice of copper tubing and antenna rods surrounding a low-frequency generator. German technical notebooks recovered at the site bore the codename Schattenfeld, Shadow Field. Translations indicated its purpose: to capture and replicate enemy wireless transmissions, rebroadcasting them in near real time with subtle alterations. In effect, it could issue false commands indistinguishable from authentic orders, sowing confusion deep within opposing forces. The prototype was disassembled under orders from the Corps Signals Officer, packed into 3 wooden crates, and slated for transport to Naples for Allied technical evaluation. A brief entry in the 13th Corps War Diary on April 18 notes, special communications device recovered, transfer priority to Naples. No photographs accompany the entry, unusual for captured technology of apparent significance. Shipping manifests from the Naples Harbormaster's office confirmed that on April 22, the crates were loaded aboard the USS Artemis, aka 21, a U.S. Navy attack cargo ship bound for Oran, Algeria, before eventual transfer to the United States. The crates were stored in Cargo Bay 3, alongside other seized material. According to the ship's deck logs, Artemis departed Naples at 1,700 hours without incident. What happened during the voyage remains unexplained. On April 24, somewhere in the Tyrrhenian Sea, the ship's engineering log records a sudden pressure drop in Cargo Bay 3. The entry is vague: inspection ordered, irregularity noted, seal breach corrected. There is no mention of damage details or missing cargo. Yet, a corresponding naval maintenance request, filed 2 weeks later at the Oran dockyard, describes severe panel deformation, edges curled outward, source undetermined. The Schattenfeld crates were not listed on the Oran offload manifest. Instead, the inventory line for 3x wooden cases, electronic apparatus, is crossed out in red pencil with the notation, lost at sea, probable storm damage. However, weather logs for the Artemis's route that week report calm conditions. No storm was recorded anywhere in the vicinity. In the years following the war, the Schattenfeld device vanished from official discourse. No technical evaluations appear in Allied Signals intelligence records. The only trace is a fragmentary memo from the U.S. Office of Naval Research, ONR, dated 1946, referencing field mimicry technologies per VET-TOR seizure, status unresolved. The memo is annotated with a handwritten question mark next to VET-TOR, as though the writer was unfamiliar with the operation. Civilian divers working in the Tyrrhenian in the 1960s reported finding what they described as an open steel compartment door lying flat on the seabed, approximately 40 nautical miles west of Naples. Photographs taken by the divers show corrosion patterns consistent with prolonged seawater exposure, but the ship registry numbers, if any existed, had been ground away. A more ominous clue emerged from an unrelated Freedom of Information Act release in 1989. Buried in a file on Cold War-era disinformation techniques is a 3-page CIA research note summarizing historic Axis experiments with radio order falsification. One paragraph mentions theoretical precedents in late-stage German war efforts, as demonstrated by unrecovered Schattenfeld array, Italy, 1944. The document is stamped "Declassified in part," with the section following this paragraph entirely redacted. Eyewitness recollections from the USS Artemis crew vary. One former seaman, interviewed in 1974, recalled being ordered to clear the passageway on the night of April 24 while special personnel entered Cargo Bay 3. Another claimed to have heard a metallic shriek and felt the deck plates vibrate, as though something heavy had struck from within. Both men swore no water entered the bay. The official U.S. Navy history of the Artemis omits any mention of a cargo loss during that voyage. The ship went on to serve in the Pacific before being decommissioned in 1947. Her hull was scrapped in 1971, along with any chance of physically re-examining the damaged compartment. Local accounts from VET-TOR still hold a whisper of the device's existence. Elderly residents remember Allied soldiers hauling up the Spider, their nickname for the Schattenfeld's tangled copper framework. Some recall hearing American officers arguing over whether the apparatus should be studied or destroyed outright. If Schattenfeld ever reached the United States, or if it was taken elsewhere under circumstances that required falsifying a loss at sea report, it remains buried in unacknowledged history. The implications of such a system, capable of injecting false commands directly into enemy operations, were as dangerous in the 1940s as they would be today. Its absence from all surviving archives suggests that someone decided it was better if Schattenfeld never officially existed at all. In March 1946, 9 months after Japan's formal surrender, a U.S. Army Air Forces inspection team arrived unannounced at a remote military airstrip outside Asahikawa, Hokkaido. The airfield had been constructed in secrecy during the last years of the war, supposedly for testing defensive fighter interceptors. Intelligence from the Allied Occupation Command suggested otherwise, that the site housed the remnants of Project Raiden, an advanced research program aimed at building long-range, high-altitude gliders capable of transoceanic flight. The inspection was led by Lieutenant Colonel Arthur L. Henshaw, an engineer who had previously overseen evaluations of captured German rocket facilities at Mittelwerk. His presence was significant. Tokyo HQ had specifically requested a man with experience in unconventional lift and propulsion systems. The Japanese ground staff at Asahikawa cooperated, but their records were curiously incomplete. Design notes for Raiden were said to have been destroyed by fire during the Soviet advance into Manchuria. Inside one of the camouflaged hangars, Henshaw's team found 2 incomplete airframes. The craft had wingspans exceeding 40 meters, with narrow fuselages resembling elongated sailplanes. Unlike standard gliders, the Raiden prototypes incorporated reinforced undercarriages and nose sections built to house compact turbojet boosters, technology that Japanese aviation experts in 1944 to 45 were not known to possess without external input. Metallurgical samples taken from the wing spars revealed alloys similar to those used in late-war German Me-262 jet fighters. Witness interviews with Japanese technicians hinted at foreign assistance. Several referred obliquely to the Germans from the north, believed to be scientists who had fled through occupied China in 1945, reaching Hokkaido via Soviet shipping lanes before the war's end. These men, according to the technicians, brought with them a method for skipping the atmosphere, allowing a glider to gain speed and altitude in short bursts before settling into a near-ballistic glide path. The airframes were ordered dismantled and shipped to Los Alamos for analysis. Crates containing their wing sections, instrumentation, and incomplete propulsion units were loaded into the main hangar for final inventory. Then, on the night of March 29, 1946, a fire broke out. The blaze consumed the entire hangar in under 20 minutes. A U.S. Army accident report filed the next morning describes the incident as electrical in origin, likely faulty temporary lighting. However, the fire's rapid spread and the simultaneous failure of nearby water pumps raised suspicions among the inspection team. Japanese civilian firemen barred from the scene later claimed to have seen 2 unidentified Americans leaving the hangar shortly before the flames erupted. These men were not part of Henshaw's roster, and their presence was never explained. The following week, remaining crates of Project Raiden components were placed aboard a C-54 transport bound for Yokota Air Base, but the aircraft was rerouted mid-flight and its cargo offloaded at an undisclosed location. By May 1946, the official record of Project Raiden ended. Henshaw returned to the United States and was reassigned to experimental flight research at Wright Field. In his personal papers, declassified in 1998, one handwritten note reads, "Raiden, lost before we could study. Orders from above." No elaboration is provided. For more than a decade, Raiden vanished from view. Then, in February 1961, a CIA reconnaissance briefing, since partially declassified, reported sightings of large, high-aspect ratio winged craft transiting the Bering Strait at altitudes exceeding 65,000 feet. The aircraft bore no national markings and did not respond to radio challenge. Their radar signatures suggested a glider-like configuration with supplemental thrust during ascent phases. A marginal annotation in the briefing file reads, "Matches Hokkaido profile, confirm with AF Intel." The U.S. Air Force denied any knowledge of the craft. The Soviet Air Defense Forces, in a rare moment of indirect acknowledgement, issued a statement claiming no aircraft of ours operates at such parameters. Yet intercepted communications from a Soviet radar station in Chukotka contained the phrase, "Not ours, not theirs, still operational." Speculation within intelligence circles grew that the Raiden technology, either salvaged before the hangar fire or reconstructed elsewhere, had been deployed in a clandestine capacity, possibly by a third party. Theories ranged from a covert U.S. black program to an independent remnant of Axis technology maintained by an unknown network of engineers. In 1974, a retired Japanese airfield guard named Masaru Kitahara came forward in a Tokyo newspaper interview. He claimed to have witnessed the dismantling of the Raiden prototypes and insisted that a third fuselage, fully intact, had been hidden in a nearby barn before the Americans arrived. Kitahara alleged that this craft was later flown out of Hokkaido at night, without lights, silent except for a deep hum. If true, Kitahara's account could explain the persistent post-war rumors of unmarked gliders crossing Arctic airspace. However, no physical evidence of a surviving Raiden has ever been produced, and all attempts to locate related files in US and Japanese archives meet with the same response: no records found. Today, the Asahikawa airstrip is an overgrown ruin, its concrete runway cracked and moss-covered. The burned hangar's foundation still holds faint outlines of where the crates once sat. Locals say that on some winter nights, when the wind comes down from the mountains, a low humming can still be heard, drifting across the snowbound field, as if something long gone were still making its way into the upper reaches of the sky. The files end here, not because the trail runs cold, but because someone made sure it would. Paper burns, witnesses fade, and the sea swallows its wreckage, yet the shape of the missing thing remains, casting a shadow across decades. Somewhere, in a locked room or an unmarked grave, the rest of the story waits. knowing that if it's ever seen in full light, the world may wish it had stayed buried.